you shouldn't have to get to a point that you hate your business in order to fall in love with it again.
Oh, yes. Hi, friend.
Hello.
Okay, we have been having a pretty heated business discussion in our private chit chat channels. And we were like, we need to record this. I'm going to recap real quick and then we're going
Okay.
to get to it. So, the big question is this the business I wanted to build in the first place?
Yeah.
Because we have been observing the patterns as you and I do, because we're nuts about that. You follow certain entrepreneurs, I follow other entrepreneurs, and we've been seeing patterns and trends where like news has been coming up basically where they're talking about how they've been like shrinking their staff or cutting their overhead or exiting altogether because they hired so many people. They thought delegation is hiring lots of people and it got really expensive. Um, but you and I've also noticed a trend on people kind of getting confused about what delegation is and basically abdicating. So we're going to
Yep.
talk about that. So those are the high points for all our YouTube crowd that wants things like at the beginning. So there you go. You're welcome. Now let us proceed. um, First of all, I just have to also say, like the first half of this year, you and I were saying before we hit record, has been nuts. Oh, so I just want
Yeah.
everyone to know that like there are we will hug people virtually because the first half of this year has been a lot of lifing. It has cut into business hard.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to salute you.
Yay. We're still here doing the thing.
We are. All right. So where do we want to start with this? We've got our notes here parked on the side. You had noticed, do you want to tell the story about the thing that you came to me? You noticed there was this famous person who she's a very large following, and she's been doing a series on reframe
Yeah.
her whole.
Well, so it's funny. It's like, it's like I could talk about that one person, but it's been a string. And I think that's why I came to you because I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like the theme keeps repeating. And what I find so interesting is everybody who comes forward with this, we'll call it the story of how I burned my business to the ground, or the story of how I almost landed in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And here's me telling, here's me living to tell the tale. Everybody comes forward as if they are the first person to talk about it. They're just like, I know that you saw something going on, but you didn't know what it was. Well, I am here to be honest about it because these conversations are happening behind closed doors, but they're not happening in the public face. And I want you to know that if you're experiencing this, you're normal too. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here, armchair quarterbacking, going, I'm, I think this is the eighth story. I think this is the eighth person who's the first person to talk about this thing publicly.
Yeah.
And the first three times I'm thinking like, oh, that's interesting. It hit that sector of business. It hit that sector of business. It hit that sector. And now I'm kind of going, oh no, these aren't isolated incidents, regardless of what anybody says. And I don't think anybody is lying, any of these individuals.
No.
I think in their circle, they really are the only person willing to talk about it publicly. The
Yeah.
thing is because of how I consume information, how you consume information, because we work under the hood of businesses, we're not as front of the business as we are back of the house.
Yes.
We see a lot more of how the sausage is made, and we're privy to those conversations much more than I think a lot of front facing business owners are.
Yeah. I think because of that context, when you and I see like the public posts that come out,
Mhm.
we immediately connect certain dots that are not necessarily obvious to other people. I think anytime you're not going to shutter your business, well, even when they shutter the business, close it, there's always this like glossy language that gets put around things. And you and I know what that glossy language is wrapping around.
Yeah.
Um, I I think it's really interesting that in the last like I'm going to say like the last 10-ish years of online entrepreneurship as it's gone from being like that weirdo little outlier of an industry into more of a mainstream thing, thanks to COVID, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was such a dialogue that got fed to everybody. And I'm going to use the blanket term everybody because it was so ubiquitous, especially in the year of 2020 moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
that, as the CEO, your time is so valuable that you should be delegating all these little, insignificant things off your plate. Hire, 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 hire. I lurked in one very famous community for about, I don't know, almost half a year. And she was recommending to baby entrepreneurs who had no offer, had no audience, that the first thing they need to do is hire someone to take things off their plate. And I was like, yo, what are you doing?
They don't have anything on their plate
You don't
yet.
have
They haven't made
where's
a sale.
that money coming from to pay these people? Like, no, and there's been such a push to delegate and essentially, like what you say, abdicate things.
Mm-hmm.
You and I have seen people, because we're behind the scenes in a lot of different places, have been how much when you abdicate too soon or you overly abdicate, you end up becoming so disconnected from your
Mm-hmm.
business. You don't know how to function in your business anymore. You and I've both seen so many instances of this
Mm-hmm.
where it's like if somebody quits unexpectedly or you have to downsize, like basically overnight and make a big pivot. And it's like you might have to say, go into your email and change something. And they're like, they don't even know how to operate their own calendar. They don't know how to, you know, answer their own emails. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a serious problem. That is not a power position. That is like so opposite of being
Mm-hmm.
in power as the CEO. And um I think that businesses who appear to have been growing more slowly or less glamorously,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I think they're going to have a big upper hand in the next coming 10 years because there's more sustainability built into it,
Mm-hmm.
and less abdication.
Yes. And so I think, the first thing is we should let's get clear on terms, right? Because, I started using the word abdicate to reference this specific tendency I see in business owners, solopreneurs, several years ago, because as an online, like I manage online communities, like I design them, I develop them. And early on, people would hire me to manage their social media, thinking that was community management, right? Because that's how I got my start, kind of was as a social media manager. And what I recognized is the moment they hired me, they thought their work was done. So, as you know, somebody who is building a personal brand, like you're only as good as your messaging, and your messaging is only as good as you. So I could come to you and I could say, okay, Mary, so what we need is, we're going to need one reel a week. We're going to need a couple of educational posts. I need some thought leadership. So give me some quotes, right? But it is on you to give me the words that I can then package appropriately to build connection with your audience. If you don't, then all I'm putting out is like my version of you, which may or may not be accurate. And what ends up happening is somebody hires you, they get into a room with you, and you are not who they met on social media. And that's like the worst case scenario, right? And so I would work with these companies, and I discovered that I had less of a problem as I started increasing my rates. But one of the things I would start to say is like, keep in mind, contracting me for this service is not the same as abdicating your marketing.
Right.
Like, you are still the CEO. You do not get to renounce responsibility as the business owner. You do not get to renounce responsibility for the public image you portray. I am just here to make it the best possible representation of you, but it still has to start with you. And I went through this period of time where I lost a ton of clients because they didn't want to do that. And there were plenty of other people in the market selling them on the idea of just hire me and you'll never have to think about your social media again.
Mhm.
Hire me and then you can go write your book. You can go on speaking tour. You'll never have to worry about what goes out on social media. And in that time, we would see people be very proud. Oh, yeah, I couldn't even tell you what's on my Twitter today. I don't even know. Like my team does that. And so then, of course, nobody means to do this, Mary. You know that.
Mhm.
But they say that publicly enough. And what they're telling everybody who follows them, everybody who listens to them is, if I want to be successful, I need to not be aware of what goes out on Twitter, what goes out on Instagram, what goes out on Facebook either.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeing now that we're going to dig into, I think we need to be aware that it's been more than just the pandemic. This has been a good 5 to 10 years in the making.
Yeah.
Because, what we've seen, we've grown up in business, seeing these people who are too cool for their own people, for their own followers, their own audiences. And so now what we're hearing as these individuals come clean on, here are the mistakes I made in business. Here's how my business became a monster that I could no longer control. And I had to like hack my monster down to size. Is the common thread in all of them is, I hired this coach who told me to do this thing, and I went and did the thing, but then they're doing that thing uncovered another problem that this coach didn't deal with. So they recommended me to this other coach or this other service provider. And the next thing you know, they have outsourced all of the autonomy of their business, all of the decision making to these 5 people who, by the way, aren't talking to each other. And they're never, ever questioning what they're being told by these individuals, because they're like, I pay them a lot of money. They're the expert. I'm going to do what they're told. And then now we end up on the other end going, yeah, but who ultimately pays the piper, right? Because those service providers, when the engagement is done, it's done. When you can't pay them anymore, they leave, they go on to the next, the next client. You're left holding the bag, all the overhead, and all the guilt and shame that comes along with how things turned out.
Well, the thing that, you and I were talking about this, like hiring the service provider, just being like, oh, whatever you say
Mm-hmm.
goes. And the thing that really struck me having watched this go down multiple times in different places, is especially in the, frankly, pyramid scheme of business coaching. There are people who are doing exactly this. They've got a big audience. They hire a bunch of these service
Mm-hmm.
providers. They, delegate, abdicate somewhere on that spectrum
Mm-hmm.
into them. And they're selling offers to people who believe that they, need more help, whatever. And yet this person who's selling the thing is actually kind of pretty darn close to the level of the person they're selling to. That's the problem that I have. That's the problem I have.
Say more. Because yes, and
Yes, and yes, and it's the thing that I believe is what is making the coaching industry right now crumble. Because during COVID, and this is where I think COVID is interesting, it's like this, extra ingredient that got thrown into the kitchen. And during COVID, we had a whole bunch of new people flood the marketplace, and they came in, and there were a bunch of people who had already been previously primed and were well versed in the lingo and in the way things were done, et cetera, et cetera. So what I noticed is that people there's like 2 groups of people. You've got people who've been in this space a while, at varying degrees of success. They've been pre-educated, pre-primed. They know the existing lingo. They know how this dog and pony show runs. And so they're marching through time. COVID drops in. You get a whole bunch of new people who flood the market. And they're like, what's this online business thing? This looks great. I can work from home, passive income. Yeah. And like, of course, they have no idea, right? They don't know the lingo. They have not been pre-groomed to accept whatever goodness or bullshit is in front of them. They don't know. They know nothing about nothing.
right.
And then COVID was like, a big scramble. Everything got scrambled up. You had some people who had been in this space a long time. They exited the marketplace. You had a bunch of newbies who also exited because they realized this is really hard. We had that whole conversation with Rachel Allen last year all about this. They're like, wow, this is actually really hard. I think I need to go. And then you had a bunch of people in both camps who stayed. And the newbies who stayed were like, wait, why are you doing it like this? Like, I smell bullshit. I don't think that sounds about right. and it's because there's a combination of new factors in place, which is like we were also living through a time of inflation, heavy inflation. Things
Mm-hmm.
cost more, life got more complicated, and then there's just sort of that post recovery of like a group collective experience of like going through a
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, which was, nobody had done that before in our lifetime. And the new folks who came into the market started questioning, but why are you doing it like that? But why? And what I observed watching established voices with the large audiences and
Mm-hmm.
big platform to speak from is how much they sometimes didn't have answers for those people. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the answer is basically like, like when you're mom and you're like, because I said so. It's like, because this is the way it's always been done. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
why? But why? Like, we have new tools, we have new ways of doing things. I thought it was really telling when AI entered the chat, so to speak, and people started jumping on the chat GPT bandwagon. But there was something about AI coming into play and service providers and educators in the marketplace changing their offers. And it's like you add one more little grain in there, and suddenly, like, the color is off. And it's like the curtain's just not closing quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that's when things started to sort of like the veneer started to kind of run off there, because there's only so much bullshitting you can do for so long before you have to admit
Mm-hmm.
that nobody knows what they're doing. AI, it was new to everybody. You cannot say that you are the penultimate expert on this, but the existing business training framework was like, I'm the expert on this. Listen to what I have to say, because I have a
Mm-hmm.
big audience, and because look at my team. I've got a whole
Mm-hmm.
team of people. And so you like mix all these things up, and then fast forward, and inflation keeps going, and the marketplace keeps changing, and suddenly people are like, why is my program crumbling? And like, newsflash, it wasn't just big programs, small programs did too. I closed my 12-month mastermind too. Like, the sales
Mm-hmm.
just weren't happening, and it was one of those things I just didn't want to tough it out. I knew it was time to be done. But these bigger programs, the distance to fall is much farther,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got to do damage control somewhere on the way down, because it's not, a smaller program like mine was. So I think it's really interesting that that so many of these people who have appeared to know something more than other people in the space, it turns out they've just been real lucky in some instances, hired some smart people who took care of some real gnarly problems. And yet, if you ask them to explain, how did you solve that? They don't really have a good answer. The person who has the answer is the service provider they paid
Mm-hmm.
solve the answer for them. And I just don't know that we can move forward in online entrepreneurship with that same dialogue that, people are talking about sort of the death of influencer marketing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it's going to change the dialogue in which we explain our offers and talk to our communities. And I think, like, those of us who stick around long enough, we will update our language. People who come into the space that are new are going to automatically adopt a new way of talking that is not based on the old influencer rules of like, look at me, I'm so fancy. Do you see my whole team? The whole thing, like,
Yeah.
my team and I, my team and I. And it's like, no, like, you are still part of the business. Like,
Mm-hmm.
either invite the person who actually does the work to come forward and speak on your behalf, or you have to be able to explain it yourself. Otherwise, my red flags go up now, where I'm like, do you really know what you're doing? Do you really know how this operates? Because I don't know that you do.
So I something you said triggered another conversation I've been having with clients, which is when you were talking about the whole, people are like, well, why like this? Why like that? And it's like, well, because I said so. What I have realized is most coaches, consultants out there who are like the big, like we're successful, we've gotten this much success for however many people, they're the big course creators. They're actually experts in one very specific model,
Mm-hmm.
right? They are experts on one particular framework. And that framework or that model is highly successful for a certain type of business or a certain type of business owner. The problem is, and so when you ask them, well, how do you know that works or why is it like that? Well, it just works. Trust the process. How many times have you and me heard from the stage somebody saying, trust the
Process.
process? But the problem is that in online business, so many of us are working with actual real live breathing humans from different backgrounds, different cultures. And they're not cookies, so they don't fit into cookie cutter models. And in the pandemic, when all of us, or pre-pandemic, when traffic was cheap and we were getting floods of people, we could all make great livings on that small percentage of people who could be highly successful with our one single framework.
Mm-hmm.
But now traffic is not as easy to come by. The marketplace is much more savvy. And the models in which people are operating, the models in which businesses are using, are a lot more nuanced. They
Yeah.
can't be as easily wedged into these out of the box frames.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so true. I love that you brought in the nuance of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you and I were also talking before we hit record about some people that we're both loving following right now. And you would ask me about one that I love. And I was like, he has a way of translating very complicated things into like more normal everyday speak. And I feel like the use of nuance, how we use it in business, has
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for that too, where it just like it makes me think of thinking about it in terms of flexibility. I think there's like a flexibility that needs to happen. Um, that we all honestly need to get better at adopting in our businesses, where it's like the marketplace I think is more fluid than it used to be. eh, I've seen people who are both service providers and sell product.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just one or the other.
Yeah.
you know I've seen people with large audiences also offer things in a way to a very small like niche part of the audience,
Mm-hmm.
and like those are like multiple types of business models operating at the same time. um but the thing that I really love that you pointed out is how much traffic has changed. I think that is really the defining factor on what has changed things for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And um it is just so not the same.
Right. Well, and let's go back to what you just said about flexibility, right? How you need to be flexible. You can't be flexible without lived experience, though,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like the only way to be flexible, because I think of this like with my background in crisis communications, like the only reason that today I can say, okay, here's the strategy we're going to use. And then if partway through that strategy, I see that things are falling apart, the only reason that I can pivot well
Mhm.
is because I have done this 5 different ways. And so because I've done it 5 different ways, I've seen it work from A to Z, but I also know the markers of when it's not working and which of the other 4 ways we should switch to in order to get to our desired outcome. But the
Yeah.
very first time I had to manage a public crisis, I did not have those models. So
Yeah.
I was having to, in the moment, go, "Ooh, do I do this? Do I do? Okay, I'm just going to make a decision. I'm going to live with the consequences of my actions." And it was easy-ish to do that. I mean, trust me, like it wasn't comfortable, but it was easy-ish because I was one player in a larger organization. And so if I got too far underwater or too far over my head, I could pull somebody else in.
Yeah.
When you're a business owner, solopreneur especially, your only option for calling somebody else in is hiring help. And in many cases, back to the pyramid scheme of coaching, not that we don't know great coaches, because we do,
Mhm.
but the only person to call in is an expert who has made a business out of selling their expertise.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I just point out, you used the word comfort in here,
Mm-hmm.
and everything went ding, 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 ding. I really feel like what people are looking for when they start over bloating their business, delegating, abdicating,
Mm-hmm.
they're prioritizing a perceived comfort for themselves. Very selfish thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. Um, comfort for themselves over the tough choices that actually need to be made. And as a CEO, it's not about the like Instagrammable luxury comfort you see.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you are the first to show up, you are still the last to leave. You are the one who is checking the thing. You're the one making the tough decisions. You're the one where the buck stops here. If the business does something that screws up, you're the one in front. You and I have both
Mm-hmm.
served. I'm thinking about one particular place where if something went wrong, I mean, they would hang the staff member out to dry
Mm-hmm.
and just abdicate responsibility for it. So
Yep.
there's an example of abdication. And that's not leadership.
Mm-mm.
And it's also not sustainability, and it's also not the way anything grows. And and there are some places where, like, I do believe, the person that really kicked off this discussion you and I had, I really love her content. I think she does good things for the world. But I think there are good people who have had the same business training the rest of us have had. They've been in the higher price masterminds this whole time. They've been hanging out with the upper echelons of like the celebrity entrepreneur crowd. They've been getting all the same messaging at a different level. And it's like they're just in a much more public place, and like watching them have to downsize is a very interesting thing to just sort of sit on the sidelines and watch happen. Um, it's unfortunate. I think it's also entirely unnecessary.
Tell me what part is unnecessary.
I think
Like
it's
I'm curious. I want to make sure that I'm tracking because I have this thought, but
okay.
what's the part that you feel like is unnecessary?
I think it's unnecessary that any of us has to go through a frankly an image problem, really,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, and maybe this is why the influencer model, like the sheen, has come off so heavily. But like I think it's unnecessary that people have to keep up appearances
Mm-hmm.
to think that they have to sell.
Yeah, no, that's true. Because here's what I find most fascinating in these stories that you and me have been following. How much stinking happier they are now,
I know, right?
right? That they've blown the thing to the ground. It's like they've talked about, like they fired their
Yeah.
team. They've gone from payrolls of like $100,000 a month to teams of say 25, all the way stripped down to like them plus a quarter time assistant.
Yeah.
And they talk about how they're sleeping better. They've got more
Mhm.
free time. It's the complete opposite of what they were told, right? They were sold build out this big team and you can go live a laptop lifestyle. And they were like, I built out this team and then I had to spend so much time managing the team or managing the people I hired to manage the team that like I wasn't seeing my kids, I wasn't seeing my spouse, I couldn't take a vacation, or in some cases, and I think this is the worst case if you're a creative, their creativity dried up. They could no
Mhm.
longer write. They could
Yeah.
no longer come up with the content
Yeah.
that was really feeding the machine and paying the bills.
Yeah.
And now that it's just them and they don't have to manage people and the feelings and the behaviors that go along with people, they're like, I like my business again. Like, I don't, that's what I think is unnecessary. Like, you shouldn't have to get to a point that you hate your business in order to fall in love with it again.
Oh, yes. That always with the mic drop. Yes. That is totally the thing. Um, and I think it's unnecessary that it has to keep repeating again and again and again. I'm like, can we pay attention to the pattern? Can somebody who's a few steps behind be able to recognize, oh, I'm starting to repeat somebody else's path. Maybe I can make some difficult, uncomfortable choices now to avoid that fate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is it that these entrepreneurial stories are like, over bloated and then balloon pops, you know,
Mm-hmm.
again and again and again. And I'm like, if we were talking about that in terms of health, because
Yeah.
like you have been totally cheering me on with all my health journey stuff. And it's like I have lived my life, with
Mm-hmm.
this like, trauma recovery. Drama, recovery. And it's like, dude, you know what that does to your physical health? It makes you very sick. That's
It
what it does.
does.
And
Well, it's like the oh, what is it? There's a study, a health study, but it talks about how it is more deadly. There's a higher instance of death in the people that gain and lose 20 pounds, like
mhm,
multiple times, than it is to live your whole life 40 pounds overweight.
yes, like the notion of what healthy consistency is, not hustle bro culture consistency, but
Right.
like positive consistency is
Positive consistency.
positive consistency. It like it no, it's not as glamorous. No, it's just not.
No.
I would argue you and I both do not think of our lives as particularly glamorous. We both make good livings. We enjoy what we do. Yes, both of
Hmm.
us want to grow our businesses more. Like who doesn't? And by grow, I mean like in terms of like growing the amount of revenue we bring in, like
Hmm.
business because we want to make more money, right? If you worked for a company and like they have, revenue goals every year too, and everyone works towards growing the company together. So like the growth is a natural thing in business. You should want that, you know. Um, oh, there you are. But I will say that I think that there's a culture shift that is like really just starting to take root.
Hmm.
And what I'm hoping is that we don't end up with a divide of people who've been in the space a long time and then people who have come in who are new, and you get sort of this generational gap problem. I think that I can see some of that happening.
Yeah, but I also think there are always players in the background. There's always people that are out there just doing the thing, working day to day, and nobody knows about them. And
Yes.
they stand in the gap, right? They're not right now we see a gap because the visible people, the public people, the people like you and me are either here or we're here.
Hmm.
But there's a whole quiet majority, I think, in between.
Yeah.
What I would love to see, what I'm hoping comes from these public, um, let's just call them, I don't know, what would you call it? Because they're not, I don't view them as failures,
No.
right? But this like very public come to Jesus sort of scenario, right? Where people are like, let me tell you what it really means to be in business. Let me tell you what I've really been dealing with. The people who are doing it in an authentic way. I
Yeah.
am hoping that they are creating a container that makes it feel safe for those just steady Eddie, quietly heads down doing the work, journeymen
Yeah.
sorts of professionals to be able to pop their heads up and go, oh, yeah, that hasn't happened to me. And that hasn't happened to me because I'm happy living here in consistency land.
Yeah. Mm. I hope for that too. I would call it the public revelation.
Mm-hmm. Public revelation. I like that.
They're still kind of like on the pulpit, like doing,
Yeah.
but yeah. Okay, I think that sums it up. I think I'm gonna
Yeah.
call it there.
Okay.
But yeah, I love that we were able to take something that was being discussed in our private biz bestie space and bring it out here. My hope is still that for our small but very slowly growing group of people who follow our series start to realize like this is what biz bestie conversations
Mm-hmm.
look like.
Yep.
And that like the real private stuff that you and I don't share on YouTube, where we're life is lifing and we're just kind of supporting each other through that. um the main dish, the entree in front of us, is still these business conversations,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's really important to kind of point out. So, but this is literally how we sound in our WhatsApp messages.
It really is. It really is.
It's just
Except
a
every
little
now and then
different.
it's me going, okay, I know I'm going to sound like a jerk here, but is it me or is it? And then you go, actually, Tonya, that's not jerky at all.
Yeah.
What I hear is this and this and this. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, okay, okay. I can get behind that.
Mine's always, now I'm going to take a hard left turn.
I like your hard laughs.